everyone got that?
Got it.
Excellent. David's our engaged program leader, and the hub comes under David's purview. So he's going to update us on some of the things that he's been up to and a specific research project that he's been doing. Hi, Nicola. So I think we'll get started just in the interest of time. There's nice, short, snappy lunchtime breaks. So I'm going to host today because Joanne has been to the dentist and is feeling a little bit sort of droopy.
Yes.
Half her face is numb. So it would normally be Joanne who's hosting this, but I'm just going to do it today. So I'm the CEO of Honey and Fox, and I've been a part of this network since the beginning. So welcome here today, and we're also proud members of the Fight Food Waste CRC. And we've got CEO Steve with us today, Stephen Laffage. So we're going to, these meetings now been going for a little while, and thank you to everyone who's provided feedbacks back to us about how we've been running them, what you'd like to see more of, and gradually over the next few months we'll be making some of the changes that you've asked for. And one of those is that we start the meeting with an update from Steve Lappage as the CEO, so he can tell us sort of in person what's been going on in the CRC, and we get the opportunity in this sort of smaller group session to ask questions and stuff like that. So I'm going to start with you, Steve, and then after that we'll then move on to David, who's got a presentation for us. So Steve, over to you.
Great, thanks Jane. So look, I think it's a good opportunity just to provide everyone with a quick update on what's happening around both the CRC and Stop Food Waste Australia at the start of each of these meetings. If we've seemed a bit quiet lately, that's because our communications manager, Tanya, has moved on and she's focusing on her PhD, and we'll start advertising for a replacement for Tanya this week. We're just finalising a revised PD. Of course, the comms role is split over both divisions now, so the CRC and Stop Food Waste Australia, so we're just adapting the position description. And in the interim, Honey and Fox will be stepping in. So thank you, Jane and team, to take on our regular tasks. So we will hopefully get a newsletter back out this week with, and it will cover a number of the updates I'm covering today. In terms of some other exciting news around staff developments, Claire Neller has just commenced with us. Now, Claire is from RAP in the UK, which is normally, highly regarded and seen as the global leaders in the fight against food waste. So Claire started at the Adelaide office a couple of weeks ago, and she'll be heading up the voluntary agreement, which is part of Stop Food Waste Australia, which is the Australian Food Pact. On that note, we've got a launch coming up for the Australian Food Pact and Stop Food Waste Australia with the Environment Minister at Parliament House in Canberra on August 25. And so if you're interested in that, I can send some more details. And as a follow-on from this workshop in a way, this presentation, we will be holding a workshop around a national behaviour change campaign, which is kind of the third pillar to the Fight Food Waste Limited that we've been working on in the background, certainly for the last year or so. I guess the other key things to mention are we've got a new innovation manager that started in Queensland, Val Natulov, who will help QDAF, or Queensland Department of Agriculture and Fisheries, find new industry participants and develop new projects. And we'll have someone starting in SA in September, who will be doing the same down here. Both have more of a chemical engineering background or life science engineering, and both have a lot of experience that they bring to those roles that can help industry partners innovate in this space. One of the companies that the SA Innovation Manager created from food waste is now turning over 40 million a year. So we're talking some serious dollars here. Just to finish with, I'll mention that the annual CRC conference is on in Sydney. Hopefully it will be a face-to-face event. we'll take it online if need be. But that's November 17 and 18 at KPMG at Barangaroo. And so we'd love to see everyone at that in person. And of course, if the situation changes, we'll make a call at the appropriate time if it needs to all go online. So if there's any questions, I'm happy to take them now, but hopefully that's just given you a bit of a taste of what's been happening in the background since the last Industry Connection Hub meeting.
So thanks, Steve. So we'll have all their contact details on the website fairly shortly, all the new people, so people can contact them directly if they've got questions.
Yeah, and so the plan is to get a newsletter out by the end of this week.
Okay.
But we will also be creating a specific page for the Industry Connection Hub that will be public facing, not behind the members' password, and that will have the resources created for Hub members that they can then go and use for their newsletters or what have you. So that information exchange has always been a key part of the Hub, and we want to step that up.
Terrific. Thanks, Stephen. Okay. Great. Are there any questions for Stephen? No? Right. Okay. Well, hopefully everyone can make the launch and the Sydney event. Be great. Okay, David, I'm going to hand over to you so you can introduce your... So David, for those who came in a little bit later, is our, for those who don't know, and everybody probably does know, is our engaged program leader and does a fantastic job, and is and this hub is part of his program. So hopefully he's going to have no problems with his bandwidth. Everyone see David's screen?
Thanks. I can see half. Ah, there we go.
Half. There we go. Yeah.
Thanks very much, Jane. How are we going? We might take a moment just to click across.
Okay.
While that's loading, I'm going to start my presentation. For me, the challenge that we all face is that showing the notes as well?
No.
So we're all good?
Yeah, I can't see the notes. Can anyone else see your notes? No.
Yeah, I still can. Mine hasn't caught up yet.
Nope. Can't see the notes.
It's not full screen mode yet for me, at least.
Not full screen, yeah, but we can't see your notes. Your notes are below the line.
Well, I'm happy to take hints from anyone. What do I do? Do I swap displays or?
You might want to click on the slideshow thing on the top bar.
Up the top in slideshow, have a try clicking on that one.
So my screen's giving me just the full slides.
It's full screen for you. The other option is, of course, we can share from our end, and if you just want to cue us to change the slides, we can do that.
Do we have the slide deck?
Yeah.
Okay, we could do it that way, David, if you'd like.
David, I imagine your actual presentation is showing full screen on another one of your screens, and you need to swap the screen that you're sharing.
Okay. There we go. Now we can see your presenter view. That's fine. No.
I'm getting the spinning wheel at this end.
David, do you want me to share?
No, because I've updated the presentation.
Okay.
Asper, can you share it from your end?
Yeah, sure.
See if that works better.
Okay, so you need to stop sharing, David, and then we can go. Have a go.
Can everyone see my screen now?
Looks good.
Yeah, I can see. It's good.
Yeah.
All right. So for me, the challenge that we're all facing is to answer a simple yet very profound question. And that is, how do we make it easy for people to stop wasting food? And I have great confidence that that's the question we need to answer, because so far I've never met anyone who thinks wasting food is a good idea. What I'd like to share with you today is some work that my colleague Gami and I have been leading within the hub. Could we have the next slide, please? So as we know, the CRC is a phenomenal opportunity to create collaborative research projects. And as Jane has already mentioned, I'm leading the Engage research program within this CRC. Next slide. And within the Engage program, we have 3 frontiers of influence. The first is the future industry leaders, where we're committed to providing educational and professional development opportunities for over 40 students. And it's very pleasing to see a number of them joining today's meeting. Then we have the frontier of the skilled workforce, and that's where the hub is playing a critical role. And then finally, but not of any less importance, we have changing behaviour in households and businesses. And the household behaviour change is a very exciting space, and that's where we hope to create touch points with over 10 million Australians. Next slide, please. The major project that we've got running within the behaviour change space is called Designing Effective Interventions to Reduce Household Food Waste. And from my perspective, this is a phenomenal example of the power and difficulty of collaboration. As you can see, we have a wide range of experts who are coming together with that common objective, that common purpose of trying to improve the effectiveness of interventions. This is a coalition of the willing, which is phenomenally powerful in its capacity to actually enact a step change. And also running alongside this project and supporting the project, we have 3 students who are undertaking specific components of it. Next slide, please. This specific piece of research I'm going to share with you today is one of the major outputs from that project. And I'd like to acknowledge the contribution made by the research consultancy that has provided the data, Instinct and Reason. They did a phenomenal job collecting data, overcoming lots of difficulties, many of them created by the project team and the high expectations that the project team has had, other ones created by difficulties of actually accessing customers and moving their teams across interstate borders during the COVID difficulties. I'd now like to move into presenting some of that information. Next slide. This is an incredibly rich data set, and I'm going to share with you some of the highlights from it. This data set was collected across 5 phases. Back in 2019, we undertook a survey of 5,000 Australian households, and that provided a very rich benchmark. And based on that 25-minute survey, we actually created a more focused survey, a 15-minute survey. And in this phase of the research, we undertook that with just over 2,000 households. Now, the interesting and important thing is, of those householders, 1,400 of them completed an electronic diary. This was a 7-day in-home diary where the household recorded food waste. There were almost 800 individual products recorded, creating a spreadsheet that the consultant tells me has almost 500,000 cells in it. So an incredibly rich data set. Then again, those people who undertook the electronic diary, they were invited to undertake a choice model where we explored their likely response to different interventions. And the reason why the number increases is because some of those individuals were invited to complete multiple choice models. And the invitation was based on their, if you like, food management weaknesses that were leading to food waste. Then out of that 1,400 from the bin audit, 1,400 from the electronic diary, 500 had their bins physically audited, which gives us the ability to connect how a household responds to electronics, to a survey, to the electronic diary, and then the actual measurement of food waste in the bin. And finally, we undertook focus groups to explore the qualitative aspects of these households. Next slide, please. So the first results I wish to share with you are around the actual amount of food waste. Next slide. As we can see, the survey, the electronic diary, and the calculated amount are all reporting total food waste, whereas the bin audit is missing critical disposal pathways. Those critical disposal pathways are areas such as home composting, tipped down the sink, or fed to pets. What is fascinating is the difference in terms of the amount of food waste recorded. And based on our assessment of the bin audit and the relationship with the electronic diary, we calculated that just over 4.2 kilograms of food is being wasted in each household in Australia every week. One interesting component of that is the amount of unavoidable food waste. And we can see that's approximately equal as we go across the different instruments that we use to measure. Next slide, please. On this slide, we're able to report very detailed data on the amount of food wasted. This is based on the electronic diary, on the 800 food products that were recorded in that space. On the left-hand side, we can see the categories, the top 6 categories, and we can see that meat, seafood, and meals, along with fresh vegetables, account for the majority of the food waste. And on the right-hand side, we can see the top 15 products, that's the individual food products, out of the total of 800, and they're categorized in their different groups. This provides very powerful insights into where the food waste, or the specific spaces in which the food waste is occurring, and gives us the capacity to focus our interventions on those targeted areas. Next slide. In the following section, I'm going to be presenting data. Most of it's based on the survey, and it's important that I explain how the data has been collected and how it's then presented. So most of the survey data was across a 5-point scale, and what I've done in the following slides is the top 2 categories have been grouped together, and then you can see most, many, and some to give an indication of the prevalence of that particular activity. In addition to that, I'm reporting statistically significant results across 3 specific demographic areas. And then we have some quotes to help illuminate the issues, and the quotes obviously come from the focus groups. So here we have a total of 29 behaviours that I'm going to be reporting on. And these 29 behaviours are based on the experts around the table, the survey we did in 2019. So we, as a group of experts, believe that these behaviours might help us to understand what's happening in our households and ultimately help us target interventions. Next slide. So these behaviours have been organised across the 5 components of food provisioning in a household. That is planning, shopping, storing, preparing, and disposing. So within the first of those, we can see that most people are actually responding well to the fridge, freezer, cupboard. So they're checking what's going on. However, I think there's an opportunity for interventions around the creation of shopping lists, and the creation of planning the meals. That's because there's still a big chunk of the households who aren't undertaking these activities. Next slide, please. We can see that the supermarket is the key place where food purchase decisions are made. Hence, they are a critical stakeholder to have in the conversation around interventions associated with food waste. And interestingly, most households are doing a weekly shop and a top up. Next slide. You can see on this slide, I'm only circling the behaviours where I feel there's an intervention or the likelihood of an intervention. Specials, buying on the shopping list, and then, and the last section, the last bullet point here, is the first time that we've come across a behaviour where there's a statistically significant demographic difference across those three areas. And we'll keep an eye on this group. This is a group of people where there are children in the household and they tend to be younger. And we'll see that repeatedly, they're the group that are coming up as having a response that's different from the average in relation to a behaviour. Next one, please. Interestingly, this group appears again around takeaway and home delivery. So it's the young, it's the children, and it's the affluent. What is also interesting is whether takeaway and home delivery has a contribution to food waste. And at this stage of our analysis, it doesn't. So people who engage in this activity aren't high or low on the food waste scale. Next slide, please. We can here's the first of two slides around storing. And my hunch is that whilst these figures are very interesting and they give us a powerful awareness of what's going on, it's unlikely that I would recommend these for interventions because fundamentally the behaviour is in the direction that supports reducing food waste. Next slide, please. However, for these other food storing behaviours, clearly there's an opportunity for an intervention around the majority of people who aren't reading the storage instructions and those things, those households where the fridge becomes very difficult to manage because it's so full of products. Next slide. Preparing behaviours, again, first of the slides, unlikely to have any interventions in these spaces. Nice to know what's going on, but unlikely to have interventions. Next slide, please. Again, it's good to see no interventions anticipated in this space. Next slide. However, when it comes to food disposal, there is definitely opportunities for interventions. To me, it's very significant that most people like to eat the freshest food. And if we read the quote at the bottom of the page, we can see the power of the desire to have fresh food. And clearly this is a challenge for the supply chain, as well as it being a challenge for the management of food waste. Also, we have the issue around date labelling. And this is quite an important area, and certainly globally, there's been a lot of effort put into the date labelling space. And indeed, the CRC is currently working on building a project in this space to try and make it easier for consumers to understand the meaning and then to follow the intention of the date labelling scheme. Also worth noting, on both of these slides, you can see the asterisks that our friends, those households with younger children, are statistically different in this space. So they are having more trouble than the average person. Next slide. Again, we can see that the children the presence of children seems to have a significant impact on the dynamics of the household, and particularly around these issues to do with food waste. Next slide, please. So what I've done so far is share the results, so just the aggregate results for those 29 behaviours. Now what we're doing is I've got 2 slides where I'm sharing with you the connection between that behaviour and high or low food waste. So what is happening here is there's a ranking, and number 1, so the number 1 behaviour that is correlated with food waste is leftovers. People don't know how to cook leftovers. This gives us a very strong evidence to say that interventions around leftovers, if we can encourage people to change their behaviours in that space, are likely to have a big impact on food waste. So the red circle there is saying, hey, we've got a couple around leftovers, they're clearly high. And then the second red circle is really around over purchasing. So how do we have interventions that are going to encourage people to purchase? Well, said another way around, how do we encourage people to eat the food that they do purchase? So they're the behaviours that are linked to high food waste. On the next slide, we have the behaviours that are linked to low food waste. So these are the behaviours that we wish to encourage. So this phenomena of using the oldest first is correlated with low food waste. And secondly, fridge management. Managing the fridge in a good way is correlated with low food waste. So the team are working on how we build those into specific interventions. This is the last section of data I want to share with you. Next slide, please. Great news, isn't it fantastic that most people believe food waste is avoidable, and most of them are motivated to reduce food waste. This gives me a lot of support for the question I opened today's presentation with. How do we make it easy for people to do this? Next slide, please. This is a data slide, and it's quite busy. But what it's saying is, one of the questions we asked is, how hard do you think it is to change your behaviour across those 5 components? And as we can see, most people are saying it's relatively low. You know, it's not that hard to change their behaviour. Again, that supports my contention that we're trying to answer that question. How do we make it easy? And again, we see that this group, the rich, young with children, are the ones that find it harder. So very strong support for that demographic group requiring customised interventions, understanding the dynamics of their world in ways that we can help them help reduce food waste. And now to the challenges. The next slide, please. Some really significant challenges to overcome. Back when I was talking about the amount of food waste, the survey instrument compared to the calculated amount of food waste, it's roughly half. So that tells us that whenever we undertake a survey, we are likely to be getting a significant underestimate of the amount of food waste. Why do we do surveys? Because we can get a lot of data on a per respondent basis relatively quickly and easily versus the much more complex data collection methods associated with the electronic diary and the bin audits. So that's important for us all to remember. The second one, whoops, back to the previous slide, please, is to do with landfill. So when we were in the qualitative phase in the interviews, we came up with this fact that some people out there see that food waste is only an issue if it goes to landfill. They don't believe that food that they don't eat, putting that in the compost bin or feeding it to pets is a problem. So clearly, if we're looking at the food waste hierarchy and trying to get as high as possible on that hierarchy, there's an issue here in terms of communication and changing understandings. Next slide, please. And as the quote here says, you know, if we go down the path of using climate change as part of our communication strategy, there's a big challenge, because some people, we haven't quantified this, but some people believe or don't know that uneaten food contributes to climate change. And that is both the uneaten food when it's disposed of, as well as the climate change in investment embedded in the food prior to. Next slide, please. So where are we now in this journey? We have a series of 6 reports. The summary report, which is the accessible version, and then we have the 5 data reports, for each of the 5 phases of the research journey. These are almost ready to go. We hope to get a press release out within the next week or so, and these will be available on the CRC website. So very, very rich, very in-depth and very powerful data that's contained in here, and the summary obviously puts it in an accessible form. So I'm really looking forward to having those available and to talking more about those, and certainly very happy to give presentations to you and your organisations if that can be helpful. Next slide, please. And in terms of the next steps for this project has a total of 7 work packages. I've already mentioned the survey of 5,000 completed in 2019 and published in 2020. That was work package 1. Work package 2 is what I've just shared with you. We're well underway in terms of delivering work package 3, the profiles. Work package 4 is already published. That's on the CRC website. That's looking at international best practice, then building up through interventions, messages, and finally methodologies to measure impact. And we will have these completed well and truly before the end of this calendar year. So a lot more for the team to deliver in this space, and I'd like to acknowledge the wonderful work that Gami is doing in this space as the project manager, bringing this all to life. And Gami's here with us at this presentation, and Gami and I will be very happy to take any questions.
Great, thanks David, and thanks Hafsa. Do you want to stop, and Gami, do you want to stop sharing that at the moment? Thanks, thank you. Well, interesting. Huge survey and huge amount of data. I can imagine the challenge to analyze all that, and it was a great summary, so thank you for that. I'm going to open it to questions. Nicola, you made a comment in the chat, so perhaps that would be a good place to start. And then I saw Joanne has a question, and if anybody else has a question, just unmute yourself and I'll come to you. Yeah, so Nicola.
Hi everybody. I guess it was just a comment to again highlight the interconnectivity of what we see and what we don't see. You know, we so often think about the food once it gets far enough along the supply chain to actually be for sale, but farmers plough food in. You know, we call it non-consumed waste fractions, or non-consumed fractions. That all has cost, and the farmer doesn't go, well, I just won't pay those pickers labor for that day because that didn't make it to market. Those costs are absorbed and they're implied into the food that then leaves. That, you know, so the food waste, no matter which part of the supply chain, is still connected and still has a cost that ultimately that consumer is bearing. So I think it's important in the education to the consumers that it's not just about what they see in front of them. You know, the price of that is influenced by the entire supply chain. Yep. And it's about 35% for many on-farm production of what doesn't look pretty enough to get to market, or what has to be ploughed in because it's not enough people to pick it, as the case would be at the moment. All those sorts of aspects. That's always just highlighting.
Yeah. Look, thanks, Nicola. Really appreciate that. And I see that the customer, in this case, the household, us, the eaters, the decision makers, we're the ultimate source of demand. And we have phenomenal power, absolutely phenomenal. It doesn't last in the supply chain for long if we're not buying it. And I feel that organisations, wherever they are in the supply chain, if they look at the customer and they certainly think about food waste and the sort of research that I'm presenting here, there will be interventions in this space. There will be changes in this space. And those organisations that want to be, jump on board early, if they align themselves with these changes, they're likely to get significant benefits, whether that's a direct financial benefit or a market share benefit or just a reputational benefit. So I think it's important that we share and talk about the customer end, but fully acknowledge that it's a whole of supply chain challenge. And that's why we have a CRC. That's why we have the opportunity to have the whole of supply chain conversations.
Yeah, I think though too, while yes, demand is always, and the consumer has huge amount of power, that information has to get back somehow to the people in the supply chain. And so that's the power of this information, I guess. And you talk about it we need to make it easy for the people in the household to make changes in behaviour. The same applies right throughout the supply chain. How do we make it easier for them to make the changes? And I guess when I was listening to this, I'm thinking, how would we present this to people in the supply chain to sort of understand what's happening at the consumer end, and how to then, what's the intervention back further through the supply chain? I think I haven't got the answer to that, by the way. I was just sort of thinking about that. Yeah.
Well, I'd love to be involved in those conversations. So.
Yeah, they're big issues. It's a complex problem for sure, tricky. Joanne.
David, will you be running another survey to sort of measure the impact of the interventions down the track? How will that work?
Good question, Jo. So I mentioned we've got 7 work packages, and the last of those is to set up a methodology so that we can actually evaluate the effectiveness of an intervention. So we can do a before and after, did it work? And if so, how was change enacted? What actually happened? There is advanced discussions around the work package 8, which is the evaluation of interventions. So we're in the process of identifying the top 10 interventions, and we're hoping to get that work package 8 up and running so that we can actually test the top 10 and be able to say, wow, this is the impact from this intervention. It did or didn't shift the dial, and if so, how much?
Thanks, David.
Other questions?
And just more a comment related to Nicola's comment. We will be, so FIAL's been leading a review of the National Food Waste Baseline, which was done a couple of years ago. They'll be launching that at the Stop Food Waste Australia, the food pack launch at Parliament House. So a couple of months away yet, but it does have much better data, the revised baseline, around primary production food loss. So that will be an appropriate time to get those figures back out into the public. And we're probably, well, we're just starting on what the communication efforts are going to be around that launch, because I think it will be a great time to really raise the whole profile of food waste right throughout the supply chain around that occasion.
Yeah, because as I said, it's really tricky getting behaviour change right throughout the chain. Getting the signals to go back to the producers. There's several gatekeepers in that process, and just some research we've done in a completely different area, the understanding of what portion sizes are, for example, what's desired, is so different depending on who you're talking to in that supply chain. Yeah. So Nicola, you wanted to?
I was just going to say, happy to keep you all updated along the way, but we've got a number of projects running at the moment, but one that's got some interesting work under smart specialization, which is looking at insect farming. And so we're engaged with a number of LGAs on how that might relate for FOGO, but also for on-farm and producing livestock feed, etc. But what comes out of it in relation to some of the fresh organic waste, etc., with the LGAs could have some really interesting potential impact.
Yeah. So David, sorry, has anyone else got a question? No, can't see anybody. David, what sort of things can this hub do to help with all of this, do you think? This hub set up with people with various networks to help get information out. What do you think we could be doing as a hub?
What I would love to do is for you guys to have a look at the presentation I've just given. Mm-hmm. And I know I've highlighted certain aspects of it, and they're the ones that me and the team have thought are important. But what I'd be really curious about is other people's perspective on what's going on there. And the combination of the presentation and the summary report makes it very accessible in terms of accessing the data. And I'd love to have some conversations around that, because I'm very aware, and this is reinforced in the steering committee for this project, where we have 12 different organisations, that different people with different experience, but also different organisations with different perspectives are seeing different things. So I'd really appreciate and welcome that engagement with the data, and then to see where we take it. Is it a case of that the data is a step towards an outcome, or is the data alone enough to create an outcome? So love that. When you see the press release, it actually highlights something that I skipped over in this presentation. It's because one of our stakeholders said, no, hang on, that's the important thing. And I go, well, all right, that's great, let's do it. But,
okay. Yeah. So then really what you're saying is that members of this network should be getting a copy of your presentation and the reports, which will be up on the website shortly. Share it with their networks and maybe have a conversation with their stakeholders. And, let's not just keep it amongst ourselves. Let's have that conversation on a broader level, and maybe we could have a discussion about this at a subsequent meeting to kind of bring some of those perspectives back to you, and meanwhile talk to you directly. Yeah,
absolutely. And Jane, if I could add to that, I mentioned we've got the other work packages rolling out. When we've actually scoped up the 10 interventions, I'd love to come back and present, because I feel those 10 interventions really point towards the changes that we're likely to encourage and hopefully ultimately see in our households. And how can we as a supply chain reinforce that or adapt those so that it has the impact in the household, but also is totally fit for purpose, if you like, aligned with what's plausible back up through the supply chain. So
sure.
That would be a great time to come back and have another conversation with this network.
Yeah.
So Jane just got a comment. LGAs are going to be really important in this exercise. Currently our council's looking at what to do with food waste. So a neighbouring council has been allowing food waste to go into their green bin, and then it goes into the MRF and it gets sorted out and they process basically into compost. So if we get them to think back up, into the households, to reduce that waste, then obviously that would be a good thing. So, and they have contact, they regularly contact with the local community for the newsletters and whatnot. So, that's the network that exists everywhere. So we need to really get those LGAs on board. And I know that there are a couple of LGAs involved in this CRC, but not many. And I think that'll be a challenge, because if we can get, you look at the number of LGAs around, you get them, half those people on board, you can have a big impact, because they're all looking at, reducing their landfill, right? And so they found a way, and there's ways now where they're down that lower end of the value chain. But what can we do to stop it or reduce it significantly, so they don't have to invest money into processing plants to convert the waste into fertilizer or whatever, compost.
Yeah.
Thank you for raising that. That's super important. And two things I can share with you. One is Esther. Can I ask you to prepare to give us a quick summary of your research? We have a PhD student who's part of the household project who is looking at exactly that, how local governments can
yes, absolutely
be part of the solution here. And that's one thing. And the second thing is we have another project within the CRC, which is called the WWW project, What, Where and Why, or the East Waste project. And what it's doing is it's being led by effectively a group of local governments in the Adelaide area. And they are doing an incredibly deep dive into the 3 bins around curbside collection. And that data will, in essence, provide a very deep case study of one area around the combination of different waste streams, of which food waste is one. And the issue of FOGO is very live in the local government space. So Esther, can I hand over to you to give a 60-second summary of where you are in the journey? Thank you for joining.
Yes, absolutely. And I totally agree that the LGAs are a pivotal importance in this particular field, especially with regards to their communication with their residents. In fact, that was going to be one of my questions to David and Gami was there a question with regards to where participants got their information from? But perhaps we'll come back to that later. What I'm doing with the PhD is looking at the role specifically of waste managers in councils in relation to FOGO. As the pressure is increasing for all councils to go FOGO, there is a certain degree of panic and resistance that I think we need to avoid. And the best way to do that is through providing decent information and a system by which councils can easily apply this system. So that's what I'm looking at. That's what my research is focusing on. We've only got 20% of our councils are actually providing FOGO at the moment. The money is there, so why aren't they all doing it? I think the answer is obvious. There's a lot of fear of doing this, and there's also a lack of infrastructure and a concern over markets at the end for the product that they're going to be gathering from the householders. So this is all going to come into my work. Lot going on out there at the moment, very exciting, really good time to be doing this. But I totally agree with Frank that the more LGAs we can get in at an early stage, so it's not so scary, the better.
Fabulous. Thank you, Esther. Great you could be involved, and thank you for taking that question so quickly.
David, if I can just quickly mention that the Australian Local Government Association has just joined Stop Food Waste Australia. And certainly Mark and I have been doing a number of talks to state-based local government associations about their future involvement as well. So fully agree with your comments, Frank, and certainly that's starting to happen, which is good to see. Yeah. Plus there's been $67 million in the last budget around enhancing FOGO collection and transformation facilities, and details on that are next to our page on the Department of Environment website. So.
And Nicola's made another point. Thank you, Steve. That's really good. Nicola's made a point here. She's Nicola, you might want to talk if not, in case someone's not reading your chat. So I think you make a really good point here. You can facilitate some discussions, but often people are seeking, you know, what can they do? Like, it's all good, great. Now what do we do? And I think that's what we need to be able to say to people. This is the problem. This is what we know about it. What do we do? What can you do? And maybe that's what they can contribute. Nicola, you might want to make,
especially when you're asking, you know, mayors or CEOs, etc., of LGAs for their time. As much as being informed is a nice to have. You know, for them, it's like we already know it's a problem. So, like I put in the chat. time with people like that is normally they'll just be like, and from here we're doing what?
Yeah. So what do I do now? Yeah. And maybe that's some of the feedback we could feed back to you, David, is what.
Please do. Yep. I'm really keen to understand the different audiences and how to package the message for those different audiences. We're also have Alex Guest as part of the Engage team is on this call. Can I give Alex a question on short notice? Because Alex is doing a lot of work in the communication space. And maybe, Alex, you could give us just an example of, I know it's very localized, but one or two of the communication successes we've had around translating these research into messages that have been engaging.
Yeah, we've had, last year we actually had an opportunity after the release of the first lot of findings to record through our university here at Central Queensland Uni, to record a podcast as part of a research series podcast. And we're very successful in that podcast getting shared amongst the community, but also getting picked up by some local radio. And it really brought about some really great interviews. We've got some great traction on social media as well. So just one example of how we can take that research and prepare it up really simply into a media release in a format and in a way that is makes sense to the community, and share that. And there was certainly a lot of interest just off that one particular release of the findings. So we'll be doing a similar sort of thing with this round of research, and I think there'll be a lot of interest in this sort of research that's coming out now in a number of avenues. So hopefully that's a good on-the-spot answer, David.
Thank you very much. Appreciate you doing that.
Yeah, that sounds really good, Alex. And I guess any examples that people have of that would be great to be able to share through this hub, because we can get that information out as well. Okay, well, I'm just conscious of the time. Are there any other comments or questions or?
If I can just add one more thing that I was thinking about as David was presenting, is one of the things that we're very interested to be able to do is capture the stories that come from the use of the research. So we've talked a little bit amongst our team about how do we start getting some of the stories of the organisations that are utilising the research and applying it in their organisation, or somehow using it within their organisation to make change. So I think if there's an opportunity to encourage that thinking as well, is if you are in a position to be able to take this data and share the findings and share the research in your organisations, please consider how you can share that back with us. We want to be able to share the next step in the journey, which is organisations that have taken the research and taken the data and actually applied it, and what kind of impact that's had. We're very keen to share those stories. So I'd really encourage you, if you have that opportunity, to please come back to David and I and tell us how that research has been applied and what impact it's having, because that's a really powerful tool as well, that story. And I think the more of those stories we can tell, the more opportunities we have to make some change.
Yeah, and come back to the hub too, so we can have a conversation about it. This one of the things that everybody mentioned in talking with in providing feedback was they wanted this to be more than just a present and Q&A, that we need to have more conversations about this and more workshops about these sorts of things. And I think Stephen, I think you're also, from the CRC point of view, you've got 3 years, lots of research starting to come out now. We've got to really demonstrate impact, and that's not always obvious. I mean, giving people a bunch of data isn't necessarily, as Nicola was just saying, we've got to kind of inspire, I think, with, oh, and here's some things we could do, and use that, and hearing what other people are doing is absolutely part of that, getting that inspiration about what does all this research mean. Yeah, great. Well, thank you, everyone. in the interest of time, it's just going 1:30. So thank you for yet another great session. Thank you, David and team, for putting, and Gammy for putting that presentation together. All of you for contributing to the discussion, and thank you to Joe and Ben and Hass for putting it all together. And thank you, Steve, for being a great CEO.
Thanks, Jane. Pay you later.
Say goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks,
Thanks,
all.
everyone. Good to see everyone again.
Okay,
See you
see
later.
you
Thanks.
next month.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Thanks.